collective action at the international level is more or less the same story as collective action at the national level. States realize that through cooperation among themselves, they will be better off in the long run. But to develop a collective system, you have to be prepared to give and take. I mean, you mentioned the European Union. The European Union was built through a series of national compromises. Many things that we have agreed to do collectively were not to the liking of to all of us, but we thought that the collective good requires that we have to surrender some of our sovereign rights so that the collective good will be promoted, and that, in a final analysis, will be good for us. If you go back to the international law, essentially, it is certain rules which, if they are respected by states, will avoid, for example, war and conflicts. So we have rules. We know what to do to get the states around to transcend their short-term national interest and to come around to agree and to act together with foresight is a very difficult business. That's why we spoke this morning about the need of political leadership at the international level to give the inspiration to people and quite often to go beyond the governments and above the governments to mobilize the people to have elements of international cooperation. Now, historically, what happened is that international cooperation and international schemes emerge after crisis. I mean, if you consider the beginning of the European Union, you will see that the small countries at the beginning got together to defend themselves from what they consider security issues and threats to them and economic development issues. And the unfortunate thing is that countries and states come around to cooperate among themselves too late and after the crisis. We do not have many international schemes that are created with foresight. In other words, to cooperate now to avoid problems later on. That's why we have a problem with the environmental issues. I mean, if you talk to the people to all countries, they understand what the problem is. And if you talk to governments as such, they will say, yeah, we have to do something about it. Yes, we have to transfer resources and help poor countries so we live in a better world. But to act on that, usually you're blocked by other players and factors, and this is the problem. In other words, issues are urgent, but the movement of national governments are too slow.
One word on that. Maybe the best balance, the optimal balance which was found between national and collective interest, this is the functioning of the United States of America. You have 50 different states which are united by one state. There is a very strong competition between the different states inside the United States. Each of them are fighting. They are fighting in the Congress. They are fighting in the Senate. They are competing for purchases, for economic presence, companies, etc., etc. But they're united by the common interests of the country. We in the European Union, very slowly, are going on the same path to unite our interests so that we can really speak in one voice. But different historical background, of course, makes the two processes very different.
Okay. I may add that in the United States it took a civil war really to bring about the federation.
I think there's something of a nightmare. I don't think anyone has even proposed it here, which is government by the General Assembly of the United Nations. So clearly the sort of collective state is non-functional. I don't even think it would be possible to have a simulation that would make that possible. But what we're seeing is different pieces moving at different paces, and so the ability to deal collectively with issues like financial regulation will be one question. The environment is another. I wanted to recommend a book for those of you who haven't come across Jean-Francois Richard's High Noon. He essentially says that the machinery of global governance is not appropriate to deal with, as he puts it, 20 global problems in 20 years to resolve them. And what you need is to put together appropriate mechanisms that address each problem, whether it's climate change or management of the seabeds or different aspects. In other words, that you have a solution that involves the technical expertise, some formation of the political, that brings in the private sector, the civil society in creative ways. And I suspect that's the way we'll move forward, is in a messy way that hopefully is adapted to each of the different problems.
May I comment on that? Just to make the discussion a little bit lively and slightly disagree with you. Yes, global government is not all, I agree. But to try to solve global issues on a case-by-case basis, separately, say, financial flows, separately monetary issues, separately environment, would not work. Let me refer really to the recent past. When we had the monetary crisis and the petroleum crisis in 1974, then the government got around the IMF and created the interim committee to deal with the reform of the international monetary system. Then the question arose that issues are interdependent in the world. You cannot solve the international monetary system without paying attention to other related issues such as development. So they created side by side with the interim committee, at the same time in the same conferences, the development committee, to see the interdependence of issues. Actually, if you talk at the same time with a number of issues that may complicate life, but that creates actually wonderful possibilities of trade-off and negotiations. If you have a very narrow base to bring around an agreement, it will be very difficult. People will not agree on a pure issue, money, or a pure issue, environment. But if you bring all these issues together in an interdependent of issues, then the possibility of having a broader framework to agree is improved, I think. So it's very difficult, one way or the other, to do something, but I will not give up any hope, even in the context of the General Assembly. The General Assembly is a wonderful institution. It is very difficult to take decisions, but it is actually a global democracy, and it is a forum where views are expressed, a point of view is developed, and I may say so because you spoke from the standpoint of view of your experience in the World Bank. Many issues started in the General Assembly of the United Nations and pressed the World Bank and the IMF to reform. So let's not give up entirely hope about, not about the global governments, but some elements of a democratic global forum to discuss the issues, and why not, sometimes even to negotiate them.
If we look in the history of development of our world, we will see that our life is full with contrasts and contradictions. Even today, in one side, because of scientific developments, is going deep and deep in specialization. In another side, thanks to the more socialized life, we are going to the integration of process, integration of life, integration of societies, integration of states, like in European Union. And all of us, we are distinguished by a lot of differences between each other. How to manage this situation? Because I'm quite sure that this will continue the life and in the future. So I think that two are the means. One is understanding and another is compromise. Nothing we can do without compromise. We have to base to find compromise with ourselves, in our family, in our city, in our state, and in the global level. For example, for environment, for climate changes, and for everything. This is one that I can say.
Thank you. Okay, the next question I think is in the third row. Someone had prepared a question, yes? Yeah. Ah, okay, all right.
Well, good evening, sirs and ma'am. I'm responding and I'm building up basically on what Dr. Xhuvelli said, and it's with regard to the issue of globalization. Well, Stiglitz said it's actually not globalization but localization, and what Dr. Xhuvelli said basically is that problems have to be solved individually by the individual nations, because let me just take an example of the internet community. The internet is not really considered very often by people, but it basically reflects the situation that we are in right now. In the start, people thought that the internet is a global network. It's one community. And everyone, was fazed by the fact that, okay, we can connect with somebody who's half a world apart from us. But then people started realizing that it's not a good thing to have this single community, because each nation has got different approaches to the different legal laws. And one example I will state will be the Yahoo case in France. Basically, this teenager accessed this website on Yahoo from France. And it was a website based in the US selling World War II items like pictures of concentration camps and things like that. And this is actually illegal in France, but it's protected by the US First Amendment. And so basically, it created a rift where people understood, okay, we might talk about global interests. We might talk about the interests of a collective, and defending our interests. But what about collective responsibility? When it comes to the matter of responsibility, who's going to take up these responsibility? Is the General Assembly going to do it? No, because we have seen how, well, when people go up to the General Assembly, they start talking, and I've been through Model United Nations Conference, but I can say it pretty much approximates the real life issue, where when it comes to the issue of responsibility, people generally just shy away from that. And I want to end on the note, quoting from a legal background. This in the common law of the UK, basically in tort law specifically, one very famous tenet would be Lord Danning's neighbor principle. So this neighbor principle basically points out exactly who is responsible for the actions. And basically, if I do something wrong and a whole entire group of people, they suffer from it, the neighbor principle basically has to clearly draft out and clearly demarcate who am I responsible to. So do you feel that such an approach should be adopted within the EU or the global nation? And how could it be adopted to enforce, well, stronger jurisdiction over the individual nations, rather than discussing about a highfalutin like general collective interest issue?
I'm ready to say a word. Indeed, the question which you raised about the crime on internet is very, very important and very difficult to be solved. That's why in 2004, when Bulgaria was chairing OSCE, we initiated a big OSCE conference exactly in Paris, because France is a leader in that respect, for crime on internet. And we agreed that we should have a common code of conduct. Of course, it will be much more difficult for us to agree with Russia how to start, but it will be much easier for us inside the European Union to develop, first of all, common code of conduct, to agree with the United States, and then to try to agree with Russia and the rest, and all the 55 member states of OSCE. This is on the right track, I can say.
Because there is a very deep disappointment about efforts of cooperation at the international level. Let me come back to that. We're not living in the first best world. We're not even trying to find a second best solution. We're trying actually to do as much as we can with the deficiencies that exist in our personalities, in our societies, and in the relations of the nations among themselves. There's no question that the nation-state will remain to be the catalytic cell of the global community, and the responsibilities are national responsibilities. But whether we like it or not, many issues are by their very nature international issues, global issues. What I do affects you, and that is not only the environment. We have to find an understanding and an agreement among ourselves how we're going to trade. Am I going to accept a free trade, or should I impose tariffs on your trade, and so forth? Those are international issues. So we have to discuss these issues at the international level. And I must say that in the past 60 years, we have made a significant progress in developing elements of collective action at the international level. We have the World Trade Organization now. We didn't have it 20 years ago. And this organization puts forward enforcing rules about trade, about technology, and many other things. We have the World Health Organization. We have the World Food Organization. And the General Assembly, which I see some derogatory comments here. Let me say that it did produce wonderful documents which created actually the basis of a global morality. The Charter of Human Rights is not a joke, it's a very important thing. Now, the Millennium Targets, which after long discussion we agreed in Mexico and so forth, set actually a framework, which is not only is not a legal framework, but it is at least a moral framework with which together we see the world, we see what are our obligations, in principle, to do, and give us a sense of direction. So it is a second best world, I agree, but it is something that we have to keep improving upon it, and we should not really continue to devalue what is happening. Of course, in the General Assembly of the United Nations, you will hear lots of nonsense and lots of irresponsible things to happen. But don't we have that in national democracies as well? But in the final analysis, through discussion and dialogue, giving the possibility to small countries and big countries to have an open dialogue at the international level, I think it is a significant progress, and we have to underline that.
One sentence, no, not sentence, one topic more. You mentioned about the localization of the solutions. Something came to my mind from my very modest, purely Bulgarian experience of how things cannot find local solution if you do not ask for a global solution. All of you have mobile phones, and all of you change your mobile phones, and I'm sure that most of you have dozens, if not hundreds, of charging devices at home who do not work for the next generation of the mobile phone. And am I right? Yeah, the same problem is with me, and as with everybody else in Europe. This is highly inconvenient for everybody, but the good news is that starting from 2010, we shall have the beginning of the standardization of all charger devices. How it happened? In the end of 2008, a small Bulgarian group to whom I had the privilege to believe started a lobbying campaign to universalize the charging devices. We wrote to the European Commission, and we were very lucky to have Günther Verheugen, the German commissioner responsible for this, who told us, okay, you're right, but not because of the convenience of the people, of the consumers. You're right because of this contradicts the eco-design policy of the European Commission. Then with his support, we succeeded to convince the World GSM Association, which succeeded to convince the International Telecom Union, which is the governmental organization under the United Nations, which is responsible for telecommunications. And they succeed to convince the 12 major producers, which are Motorola, Apple, Ericsson, Sony, Nokia, etc., Samsung, everybody. And they agreed to do it, to start this process of unification from 2010. This is a very simple example of how we cannot find a local solution. We cannot tell these guys, look, we need universal chargers only for Bulgaria. It's absolutely impossible. But if we started with the European Union, and the European Union convinced these major players to do it for the rest of the world. Maybe there will be some isolated places where this will not happen, but for the majority of the planet, this will be the fact. And they calculated that in this way we are saving some 13 million tons of CO2 emissions annually, and some 20 million tons of electronic waste annually. If you ask me what is 20 million tons electronic waste annually, this is a big tunnel which goes around the equator of the planet, which has half a square meter its intersection. And if you multiply this for 20 years ahead, you can imagine that the whole planet would have at least that thick carpet of electronic waste all over the planet. So, but this is just the beginning. There is a huge potential in the standardization if we have such a universalized approach. Batteries, panels for lifts, especially batteries for photo cameras. Every photo camera is produced with a different standard of battery in order to keep the monopoly of the different producer. And this is something which, if we change, free of charge, without any single penny invested in this, we can save hundreds, if not thousands of millions of tons of CO2 and of electronic waste. But this is only a universal solution, and this is my current passion. That's why I wanted to share it with you.
Thank you. Excellent.
I must say that's great news, as I've tried to sort out my chargers and batteries. I've spent most of my life and career dealing with the realities of an organization that has 185 member countries, which all have their opinions, and where essentially you move with a slowly evolving consensus, and at the same time you find ways to do things despite the rules and regulations. In other words, that's reality, the realist school of thought. I do think that people come to this conference in a sense looking also for the profits. In other words, what are the things that we're not seeing? In a sense, that's what I'm looking for. And I've been at enough conferences in Silicon Valley to know that there are people who are thinking very differently. And I think you want to be exposed to both. There's a wonderful quotation that Robert Kennedy used. Actually, it was McNamara's final comment too. You see things that are, and you ask why. I dream things that never were, and I ask why not. I mean, this is the sense that we really do want a better world and that we don't want to be bound by the realities. Now, I know a lot of young people were truly in despair in December about the Copenhagen, not only young people, but particularly, I think, young people who had invested so many ideals in the principle that this was the most important meeting of their lifetime, that it's existential, that their very survival depended on the capacity for action. Well, clearly, it was the wrong forum to try to get action, and it was a very disappointing result. At the same time, we're seeing this extraordinary explosion of progress, the social media, the technology. In Silicon Valley, they say half the jobs that today's 16-year-olds will do have not been invented. You do have a whole host of different organizations and ways that cross national boundaries, where essentially national boundaries are increasingly less relevant. They're still relevant, where there are all kinds of creative possibilities. So I think that we're all of us trying to balance the reality of border controls, nation states, political parties, voting, transnational companies, with what might be possible in 20 years, and to be on the cusp of trying to ride the positive potential of the wave. So I think that you'll find us all, I'm certainly schizophrenic, between being a realist and working within the system, but having a sense that there are things that are truly changing, and that my generation has no concept of, but that's, in a sense, what you're looking to.
I think that the argument that we are discussing is very close related with the dialectic of life and the philosophical nature of humankind. Why? Because we never arrive in a perfect solution. Never. This is the problem of generations. But step by step, day by day, year by year, decade by decades, and century by centuries, starting from the smallest point up to the biggest one. For example, I believe that you know what is the plant breeding, plant genetics. You have heard a lot for this. If somebody needs to establish, to create one new variety of wheat in order to be with high productivity and early maturity, for example, and the breeder, after some research and experiments, achieved it. But after he put in production new variety of wheat, he discovered that, yes, his new variety of wheat is with early maturity and high yield, high productivity, but is vulnerable to disease. So he continued his work. And this is the progress. This is the progress. Like in medicine, if you have a disease, you can get a solution by one medicine, but primary role of medicine is to be you more sunny, let's say, but has and secondary effects, and you work indefinitely without end, and this is the process. So I think that is the problem of generations and problem for all of us to do something, to improve something, and because nothing is perfect, nothing is final, and this is life.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor back to the participants. I'm not sure who is next.
I am.
Okay.
I'm next. Riemann looked. He said, "Uh-oh." I'm the cameraman. First of all, myself and Sarah, we filmed this. And my experience has been, I've been very impressed with the broad spectrum of speakers, the varying viewpoints. And I've been asked to, by several people, more than ever before, to provide material. It's been a very successful conference from my point of view. And when people ask for these movies, it just means that I must work harder. And the more successful it is, the more work I have. So there's a trade-off here. But having said that, there are a couple of things a couple of observations I had. It's art and science and literature and what have you that separates us from the rest of the life forms on this planet. They also have a right to an existence. I'm not denigrating their existence. There's been a spate of movies just recently. For instance, Avatar. And I've read some reports where children or young people have had anxiety attacks because of the plot that was laid out. Imagine that in the future, people are saying that people from Earth are going to other planets and exploiting them and destroying people's environment. Well, these things art reflects life, our life. And so the children were having these anxiety attacks, saying, "Oh, wow, you're very upset about this." And they're trying to like compare that to their own existence. There's been a lot of talk here about climate change, about growth, 0 growth, 5% growth, 8% growth. And my question to this panel, and actually to everyone, because I think one thing has been lacking, and that is what sacrifices must we make here in the quote-unquote Western world, because we use the majority of the resources. We use an inordinate amount of the resources of this planet. There are varying figures on how much energy the United States uses, but let's just say 50%. Some people say 70, but let's just say 50. So that leaves half of the world with the rest of it, with the remaining 50%. Now it would be safe to say that Europe would use a great majority of that other 50%, which leaves the rest of the planet with a pitiful amount of energy to use for their development. Now, if we're going to change the situation, then in my estimation, that must change. Now, how that's going to happen and over what period of time that's going to happen is also up in the air. Now, just one thing about movies. When I was a kid, I saw a movie called The Day the Earth Stood Still. I don't know if maybe some of the people on the panel who are my age or older would remember this movie. Maybe you, Mrs. Marshall. Well, wait a minute. Wait. I don't mean to insult anybody, or make anybody uncomfortable. But I'm 62. So this spaceship lands in Washington, D.C., and a man comes out, Michael Rennie, and he says basically, "Hey, man, Earth, you've got to get your shit together. We've been watching you, and we're not satisfied. And you have so much time." And the question of the world government, well, of course, they all got together, at the UN, and it was discussing and that was the first. Oh, what's that going? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, he did get shot. Well, I was just kind of, I don't want to tell the whole movie. But the point is this. Is that you come to a time, it's just like when an airplane takes off. You've got V1 and V2, rotation 1 and rotation 2. Rotation 1 says you got to take off. Rotation 2 says you better take off or you run out of runway. Where are we and where do we need to go? Because as the Ghetto Boys would say, a rap group, it'll take time, but how long will time take?
I will take one more question. Respond to both.
Hello. My question actually relates to the development aid lecture interestingly we heard, and my question would be if you see a disconnection or connection between the development aid discussed in Copenhagen, climate change aid, and the classical approach you taught us, Haiti, Africa, and stuff. And also, I would be interested in Mr. Arsenis' view on Mr. Bernanke's approach to solve the disconnection between the deficit and the Chinese financing of the deficit. So what inflation do you expect, or what do you think is the next step of Mr. Bernanke in the short term? Thank you.
I think the question of how much time we have is actually a very pertinent one, and it's one that I hear from my students and from my children. This sense that there's far more urgency to addressing these problems than business as usual is coping with, and that is scary, and they're scared. My son is terrified and angry with any failure of action. So I'm very conscious that you can see the world from very different perspectives, which does lead to the next question. Clearly, the environmental agenda and the development agenda are overlapping and intimately related and interconnected. The dilemma is the one that I was talking about yesterday, in a sense, that the sheer mathematics of every person in the poorer countries consuming at the same rate and in the same pattern as people in the rich countries is unthinkable and the end of the world. I think in a very literal sense. If suddenly from one day to the next everyone was driving cars and consuming power and doing all these other things, that it's utterly unsustainable. The hope is the acceleration of technology and the conviction that the creative powers of human beings will make it possible to have it all. The question is, will it be fast enough? Will it be enough? And how do you encourage that happening? I mean, there are grounds for hope. To give a few things, it's the capacity to improve smog and pollution has been absolutely remarkable. The change in habits on smoking has been stunning. When I went to graduate school, there were no women in medical school and in law school. They're the majority now. I mean, you've seen social revolutions, and not to speak of cell phones and the internet. So that we do know that it's possible, but the question is, how do you overcome the lethargy and so on? Now, on the development and environment, I don't think, and this is the moral issue, that it is moral, and it's also totally impractical, to tell the Chinese and the Indians that they have to slow down their growth for the world. First of all, it ain't going to happen. It just plain ain't going to happen. But in addition, it would be immoral. But then you get into questions about, what about coal? What do we do about the fact that there's such a heavy dependence on coal? And the only answer that I think we've been able to come up with is to keep the transparency and the visibility, which is something we haven't talked about very much here, but which is very important, the role of information, to do everything to propel the technological innovation, which we can, and to constantly be aware of the balance.
Well, I agree that technology is the key. But first of all, let me make this remark. We have arrived here not by planning, but by a series of accidents. We didn't plan the world that way. It happens. that we are at this stage. And what is going to happen in the future, no one knows. I saw projections that will show that the population will be 9 billion in a few decades. It might be 900 alone, or it might be no human life on this planet. All these things are possible. The thing is, what can we do? There is one thing that we must do, is to put a special emphasis on technologies that will accommodate improvements in the standards of living in the world without taxing environment and our resources. But you cannot count on that, at least in the short run, in the next 10 or 20 years. I think, and that is a moral issue, I think we have to start changing our lifestyles. We cannot have a world which will have the lifestyles we have here in Europe or in the United States, all over the world. It simply cannot be done. I don't know, maybe in 20, 30 years, technologies will be found where we'll have these consumer societies all over the world. But as things stand now, without changing our lifestyles, we're not going to have a safe future for all of us. And that's a difficult thing. We have been used to a different pattern of lifestyle. And things have changed tremendously in the past 80 years. If you go back, even in Europe, 80 years ago, life was very different. The consumption patterns were very much different. Now, I don't see why the younger people really cannot start thinking about developing a style life very different from the one that we're giving them today. And that is a different issue. It is, if you wish, it is a reverse development of the patterns of consumption and development we have had so far. And we have to start thinking and talking about that too.
Okay. I'd like to take a liberty, since I have the microphone in my hand, and ask a question myself. One of the things that I've noticed from the past 4 days, we've discussed a lot we've talked about global governance and green technologies and what the private sector can do. But I feel one area we haven't, or we've only addressed briefly, is what civil society can do in the future of the global economy. And I wanted to ask the panel, and in particular Mr. Arsenis, what role do you think that civil society should play in the future of the global economy, or what role can it play? And in contrast, or in sort of complementing politics in the private sector?
Well, politicians want to have full employment from themselves, so they don't like other actors in the political game. But seriously now, non-governmental organizations, because basically that's what we're talking about civic societies, can play a very important and complementary role. Governments are more often than not blocked on certain issues, and people can organize themselves in the civic society to take initiatives and do certain things. And I certainly think that in the modern world we could and we should promote the civic society, and I think through that you will see many things which are very difficult or impossible to deal with at the level of governments to be solved by civic society. Now, I know that there are many non-governmental organizations which create headaches, and I know that also can become actually instruments of subversive policies in a number of parts of the world. But on the whole, I think that civic society is something that we certainly should promote.
Okay, I would suggest maybe we take 2 questions now together, just because I see many hands.
Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Oh. So we addressed right now the role of the civil society, but I was wondering, so we were always talking about global governance and the instruments or toolbox they can use, and we talked a lot, maybe implicitly, but we talked about legislation, so setting rules. And there is one, I would say it's one mechanism which is really important, and that would be the courts. And I mean, if we just take the example of the European Union, the European Court of Justice is actually one of the most progressive and driving parts within the European Union. They are so progressive that actually a lot of member states say, no, please stop. You're way too fast for us. So I was wondering which role you think they can play to cope with all those challenges.
We can take one more question.
It is certain that a shift in global politics and a partnership with the civil society enforce developmental initiatives. What are your respective ideas to respond / absorb non-calculated risks, for instance, terrorism?
Okay, maybe give the panel a chance to respond, or would anyone like to take? No volunteers. Should we take a third question then? Or? Okay, let's take one more question then. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't want to give the microphone up, Mark. Very, very sorry about that. I just wanted to say something positive, because I heard some negative comments during some of the panel discussions and from the floor, and I wanted to inject a bit of optimism, because I'll be quick. I'll be very quick, I promise. In my work, CSR Institute, I have seen something which works right now, is massively efficient, reaches the people, sidelines corruption, and really doesn't give the credit, and I use that word, no pun intended, it deserves, and that is microfinance, and it's even less known sister, microinsurance. And what I'd really like to say is these mechanisms of lending, maybe $200, $300 to a woman, say, in Bangladesh, to buy a sewing machine to start her own sewing company. A lot of people don't know, but the default rate of these people with microcredit finance and microinsurance is lower than the DAX 30 companies and the Wall Street companies. If you lend money to a poor person to start a company in Bangladesh, you have more chance of getting your money back than if you lend it to a big American corporation. What I'm saying is, and this, I particularly aim this at the two, the World Banker and the Greek banker, surely we can use this. This works already. It's so simple, and it's a wonderful instrument. What we should be doing is taking the money, and it's not really that much that's needed, taking the money that we often give to governments to buy massive big dams that we're not quite sure will produce what they're intended for, and which produce often disjointed societies or polluting factories. And we should be massively scaling up microfinance and microinsurance to the poor people of the world to unleash their abilities. Thank you very much.
Collected quite a bit.
I guess there are at least some threads that we can pull together. First of all, microfinance and microenterprise is something people are very excited about, and it's exploding in many parts of the world. And it's very attractive as well. In some senses, it's the magic bullet because it's relatively small. It's private initiative. You don't have to deal with governments. You don't have to deal with corruption and so on. And in that sense, there is an element of fantasy in it, in that it brings back the question of the rule of law and the fact that nothing works in a failed society. So I think you simply have to combine. I mean, you have to have the fire from above. You need the leadership. You need the vision. You need the inspiration. But you also need that energy that comes at the local level. So microfinance works in reasonably successful societies. I think that the main constraint on microfinance at the moment is the quality of the institutions. It's not, there are plenty of people who are eager to put it in, but I think that there are huge numbers of microfinance programs that are really not very well run. So that I think is part of the, as I understand it, that's the immediate challenge. But microfinance, giving a woman a chicken and letting the chicken lay eggs is only a part of the solution. And I think that we need to keep our eye on education and health and on creating the kind of security and the conditions that will make it possible for people to unleash their energies and their potential.
In many developing countries, there are traditional institutions which could be used for development purposes. Local cooperatives is something that could and should be encouraged, where those institutions or traditions exist. And these local cooperatives could be helped through finance, and they could do a lot of work with transparency for development. And we do have some good examples in several developing countries to that effect. That's another aspect of microfinance. But to come back to the question of the international courts that was raised, let me clarify one thing. In the European Union is a treaty, and it involves obligations and rights. So if there is a dispute, or if there is a violation of a particular article, we do have a court which decides and imposes penalties for the country or the groups that violate certain rules. But we cannot have that at the global level. At the global level, we have the International Court at The Hague. But there, for a case to be brought to the International Court, the disputing parties should agree among themselves that they would refer the case for arbitration to the International Court. And I must say that the many difficult issues and conflicts between the countries were solved through the intermediation of the International Court of Justice, particularly on questions that are related to frontiers, to the continental shelves, and the law of the sea. We do have decisions and conflicts not among developing countries, but among developed countries as well. I mean, the Baltic area, the United Kingdom, and so forth. So those are useful institutions, but they go as far as we can with the international system we have.
Thank you. I know that one of our panelists needs to actually leave, and I'm looking at the clock. We're already a little bit behind schedule. So I would suggest at this moment maybe a final statement from Professor Xhuvelli and then also Dr. Passy, and then we can bring the formal part of the conference to an end. And first, Professor Xhuvelli.
Since it's the last chance to speak for this Congress, I only would like to thank you very much for organization in excellent way of this very important activity, which discussed in 4 days so important questions that are related with the present and the future of humanity and of our world. And what I'm very impressed is the audience, the people participating here. Fortunately, Mostly of them are young persons with a very good perspective ahead. And sincerely, I wish for all of you, for U.S. Institute for Cultural Democracy, and for all people here, all the best for your life, for your career, and let's hope that we see again each other in the better conditions to discuss other things and to see what progress has been done by our society. Thank you very much for all of these things.
I think this was a real conclusion of the meeting. And let me just add that I'll be very happy if Mark and his colleagues from ICD are generous enough to invite us in 3 to 5 years from now. And then we who are on the panel will ask the questions, and you who are in the audience will give the answers. So I wish you to govern the countries and the world better than we did it.
Thank you very much. So I would like to also now take this opportunity to extend my gratitude, really in the spirit of you get what you give. And I think in this sense, the participants this week really gave so much in terms of their energy, their inspiration, their questions, their curiosity. The speakers also having spent really a very generous amount of time with us, both formally and informally, sharing their insights, sharing their experience. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the ICD staff, the ICD interns, the ICD volunteers, the ICD advisory board. Truly, it really does take a village to raise a child. And in this sense, the whole village came together. I think we all experienced that throughout the entire 4 days. So really also from my side, a tremendous thank you. I think it was really a special occasion and a privileged occasion to be with such distinguished speakers, as well as such a distinguished participant group. So once again, maybe a thank you from my time, and I'm very much looking forward now to the informal part of the evening, and to coming back in maybe 3 to 5 years, as Dr. Passy said, and switching the roles. So thank you again to all of you. Thank you.